Hey everyone, Fine here, back with another controller review. Today we have the Hori Fighting Commander OCTA for the PS5, PS4, and PC. So it's been advertised as a controller that's meant for fighting games, but you can also play with 2D games on it. As you may have seen, the controller, it only has one analog stick, a D-pad, and then a 6-button layout on the right side. So as per usual in our review videos, we'll be doing an unboxing, and then we'll get a feel for the controller, and then we'll test it out on several games after, and then we'll give our conclusive thoughts on how good or how bad the controller could be. So without further ado, let's go with the unboxing. Okay, so here we go with the unboxing. Thank you for data blitz, by the way. Here we go. We have a warranty card on the back. Here we are. The Hori Fighting Commander OCTA. So it's just the box. Here's the back. Mostly written in Japanese. At least most of the text at the back. Now I'm gonna open it. Now let's take a look. We have the manual right here, and the cables, the controller wrapped in itself. Here. So here it is, the Hori Fighting Commander OCTA. So as you can see, it is designed for PlayStation. There is an Xbox version of this, as far as I know, and you can see from the left hand side there's a D-pad, then one on analog stick, and on the right side is a 6-button layout that's meant to be really close to how arcade sticks are used, because most fighting games do try to use like 3 buttons or more. It is a layout that's meant to be used for fighting games, and well, it looks like a really nice controller so far. And I can see at the back there's also uh, a lock toggle. I don't know what that is, but at the bottom it tells us which console we can use it for. So there's PS5. It's at the PS5 right now. On the center is PS4, and then on the rightmost side is PC, which is the only mode we're gonna use it for now. So with the R1 and R2 buttons here, you can see on the shoulders buttons, you can see the, oh, it's backwards. Right, this. We have the L1 and L2 buttons on the right side where the 6-button layout is. And then the R3 and L3 where the D-pad and analog stick side is. What else is there to note? So there's also a mute and settings button right in the bottom here, because there is a hole here where you can stick your headset jack. And then your usual start and select buttons, and the forgot what you call this for the PlayStation. So right now I'm trying to get a feel for it. I don't know if you can hear it, all the buttons here. It does feel nice. I did hear that there was micro switches being used for the 6 buttons here, so it feels like a keyboard button if you hear this. It does feel nice. As for the D-pad, it does feel hard and nice to use. I prefer, like, in my arcade stick, I do like it if this stick is much harder to use. You need more strength for it. And then the analog stick feels pretty standard. The top part of the analog stick feels nice. It's pretty rubbery, so your thumb's gonna have a hard time trying to slip out of this. So it sticks really well, feels very comfortable. Also notice just how wide the shoulder buttons are compared to a usual PS4 or PS5 R1, R3 buttons. And it feels nice. So I believe that's all of the buttons and features that are noticeable for this controller. So I guess we can start trying it out on games. Alright, so here we are with Street Fighter 6. It's a 6-button fighting game, so I figured this would be the best game to first test it on. So we're gonna go first in training mode. Alright, so here we are now. Well, definitely much more comfortable to do Kimberly's target combo, I guess. Here we are. Definitely better than having to use my index finger to press the shoulder pad buttons. Just using my thumb for it. Also, the buttons, again, are really comfortable to use because of the micro switches. It feels very clicky, making a very distinct sound, so maybe that's the one problem with switches like these, but it's very comfortable to press. As for the D-pad, I'm only ever gonna use the D-pad if I'm ever gonna play a game, but just a test. It'll definitely take some getting used to because it is a weird layout, even though it's supposed to be a much comfortable layout compared to a pad for fighting games, but I kind of like it so far. It feels really weird because the default thumb position always puts my thumb on the triangle button because that's where I'm expecting where the square button is, which is my light punch. Okay, so for another game that I wanted to try was Touhou Night. Again, even though it has no two analog sticks that make it more difficult to play on FPS games or third-person shooter games with camera movement needing to be used for needing to be used with an analog stick, you can still play. I still believe that you can still play a lot of 2D games with this, which I have a lot. So definitely like Metroidvania style games would be very well designed for the Hori Fighting Commander. So another reason why Metroidvania games would be great to use with the Hori Fighting Commander, with the Hori Fighting Commander, is because of the skill system that they usually have in this game. And you can definitely access it with the R1 and R2 buttons. I'll demonstrate with a different save. So now I don't need to use the shoulder buttons at all. All I need is the R1, R2 button to scroll to my skills. Then I have my basic buttons for jump, attack, time stop, and my skill button. Okay, so it has been a little over a week since I've been using the Hori Fighting Commander OCTA, and I wanted to give my conclusive thoughts on how the controller is. But to begin, I wanted to start with a small comparison between an arcade stick and a DualShock controller. Although this comparison won't be too long because I want to focus on one pro and one con alike from these two controllers. So for the DualShock controller, one of the better benefits you get from using it compared to the arcade stick is the D-pad side. It is much better than using a lever or a stick because it is much more precise. It's much easier to press. There's very little travel time for a input to register as compared to an arcade stick where it can be hard to tell when the input, your direction, will register because of how far you have to push the lever or stick. So that's one pro for the D-pad and one con for the arcade stick. However, this can also be balanced out by something the arcade stick has that is better, or arguably better, than a DualShock controller, and that is the buttons that the arcade stick has. For the buttons, well, it can still be subjective, but it is much more comfortable to have all 6 buttons that you usually use for a fighting game to be right at your fingertips. So when you're using an arcade stick, it's much easier to press the buttons rather than having some of the buttons that you need to use in a fighting game be on a shoulder buttons. Or even in general, for some players, they rather have 6 buttons that they usually use for the game be available right at their fingertips. So a DualShock controller will have a better control scheme being the D-pad, and an arcade stick will have better buttons that are easier to use, or a controller. So why am I discussing this? That is because, in my opinion, that is exactly why a Hori Fighting Commander OCTA is created. It was designed to take the best of both worlds of both controllers. You get the D-pad, which gives you much precise control over your directional inputs, and the 6-button layout to emulate the arcade stick, which had better feeling or better access to your buttons as compared to a usual DualShock 4-button layout. So now let's continue on a recap of the features of this controller. So first of all, it is meant to get best of both worlds of a arcade stick and a DualShock controller, the D-pad and the 6-button layout. So I will say though that the feeling of both the buttons and the D-pad, they're pretty okay. The D-pad is nothing too special, nothing too crazy, although the quality of the analog stick and the buttons are definitely more unique since the analog stick does have an octa gate that you can feel. You can definitely feel hitting the corners much more easily, or the 8 different directions. And then the buttons, well, they are micro switches, so it does feel better. It feels clickier, but for me, it feels much better, much more comfortable to press as compared to the average DualShock controller. Another key feature of this controller, and kind of the reason why I bought it in the first place, is the compatibility with the consoles. So when I go to other local events, they're definitely going to use either a PlayStation 4 or a PlayStation 5, and it's going to be tough to find a controller that's going to be compatible for a PlayStation 5. This is the main reason why I bought this controller. But, well, I'd also argue that for another point of the feature is the convenience. It is much easier to bring this around, to bring a controller like this that's much smaller, much more easy to carry around compared to an arcade stick. Now finally, there's another feature that I actually wasn't able to demonstrate earlier when I first got the controller because I only just learned now, is button reassignment. So it's actually much more, the buttons of the Hori Fighting Commander is actually much more customizable or reassignable. You can do it in 2 ways. You can do it using the controller itself. So there's the settings button right here. So there's a setting buttons right here. If you hold the button, you're gonna get the red blinking button. So when you want to change a button, for example, you want to change your X button into the circle button, essentially changing it to make it like you have 2 kick buttons, 2 light kick buttons. You can use the setting button to reassign the button. Additionally, you can also just use the software that comes with the controller that you can download by looking it up by searching Hori Fighting Commander software, and then you can download it from the Hori website. So now I want to give my personal thoughts based on experience of how I use the Hori Fighting Commander Octa. So in all honesty, there's nothing too special about this controller. It's basically a D-pad style controller. I'd say that, well, if you want to play more games, I'd argue that a DualShock 4 or DualShock 5 controller is probably better to use than a Hori Fighting Commander. Although, if you do want to purchase this controller, the only thing you're really after is the D-pad and the analog stick. And I guess the buttons. The buttons definitely give a much different feel from a usual DualShock controller. But if that's all you're really at, other than that, I don't think there's really too much upsides to this controller. It's a very unique layout. And just like any other controller, if it's your first time handling this, you're gonna have to train your hands and fingers on how to use it properly. You gotta train your muscle memory on how to do your combos, which buttons to press, and it's especially weird, like from what I tried out. Usually, where your circle button is where the X button would be, because all the buttons were pushed downwards to make space for the R1 and R2 buttons. So every time I want to press the confirm button, which is usually the X button, I keep on pressing the circle button. So it's kind of weird. Although again, it's literally just getting used to, right? It's literally just training your hands and fingers on how to use this controller better. Then again, there's nothing too special about the controller. There's a handful of features that you might want to go after. So one thing I will say though is that this is one of, if not the cheapest controller that is compatible for a PlayStation 5. I'd say it's much accessible for most people if you wanna get used to a controller that might last for the next several years. Last thing I want to mention is the convenience of the controller. I've always mentioned this, but it's always a hassle to be an arcade stick owner, especially if the arcade stick's only compatible with PC, because it's really difficult to bring it around to any event or anywhere else outside. Like, my advice for anyone who has any interest in playing fighting games for the long term, right? I just suggest they would play on a smaller controller, probably a D-pad or a DualShock style controller, because it's much easier to bring around. You just need to put it either in your pocket. It makes so much space for your bag as compared to bringing an arcade stick. So it's much easier to bring around, much more comfortable, and well, I'd say this is definitely a lot cheaper than most arcade sticks or controllers on that point. What else is worth mentioning? Oh yeah, personal preference on the D-pad as well, because this is very similar or the same style of a D-pad to that one Logitech controller. I'm much more used to that than the DualShock controller, where each button of the 4-button direction is separate. I rather that all the buttons are actually stuck together like one button. So I don't know, maybe that's what you're into, or maybe you don't want to use this controller if you're not into that style of a D-pad. So finally, we are going to give an overall rating for this controller, which is out of 5. And I would rate this, the Hori Fighting Commander Octa, that costs like 3,000 pesos, out of 5, a rating of 3. There's nothing too special about it other than it's much easier to use and it's much more accessible for most people. So, well, if you're into a D-pad controller and you want a controller dedicated for fighting games, then this is the controller for you. Anyways, that's it for this video. Hope you got a better insight on the Hori Fighting Commander Octa. Are you gonna buy it? Are you persuaded not to buy it? Are you into D-pad controllers, or do you actually own one already and had a better or different experience from mine? Let me know down in the comments below. Other than that, don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it. please click the notification bell so that you always stay up to date with all of my uploads and videos, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.